They did what? I watched my husband's face transform from confusion to hurt to anger in the span of seconds as he processed what I just told him. I hated being the bearer of bad news, especially with Christmas just 2 weeks away. But there was no sugarcoating this. Your mother called while you were in the kitchen, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. She said they think it's best if we don't attend the family Christmas this year. Because of the cafe? David asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded, remembering the barely disguised contempt in Evelyn Harrington's voice. She said something about not wanting to dampen the holiday spirit with talk of our unfortunate business situation. David closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But not surprising, at least not to me. The Harringtons had never fully approved of their eldest son marrying someone they considered beneath their social standing. I, Melissa Chen, daughter of Chinese immigrants who owned a small grocery store, was decidedly not what they pictured for their blue-blooded son. For years, they'd maintained a veneer of polite acceptance, especially after David had become a successful investment banker. But when we'd made the decision to leave the corporate world and open our dream cafe 6 months ago, that veneer had rapidly cracked. Quitting a perfectly good career to serve coffee, Evelyn had remarked during her first and only visit to Clear Day Cafe. Well, I suppose everyone needs a hobby. It wasn't a hobby. It was our passion project, a bright, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows, serving ethically sourced coffee and my mother's Asian-inspired pastries alongside traditional cafe fare. We poured our savings and souls into it, and for the first few months, business had been promising. Then the economy took a downturn. A major office building nearby announced layoffs. Construction on the street disrupted foot traffic. Suddenly, our comfortable financial cushion began to thin. The Harringtons, with their old money and country club memberships, viewed our struggle not with sympathy but with something closer to vindication. This Christmas disinvitation was just the latest in a series of small humiliations. I'll call her back, David said, reaching for his phone. I placed my hand over his. Don't. Please. Mel, I'm not going to let them treat us like this. And what will arguing accomplish? They've made up their minds. I squeezed his hand. Let's have our own Christmas. Just us. In our little apartment above our struggling cafe. I meant it to sound defiant, even a bit humorous, but my voice caught on the last words. The truth was I was exhausted. Tired of proving myself worthy to the Harringtons. Tired of the daily struggle to keep our business afloat. Tired of watching David torn between his wife and his family. He must have heard it because he pulled me into a tight embrace. Hey, he whispered against my hair. We're going to be okay. The cafe is going to be okay. How can you be sure? I asked into his shoulder. Because I know something they don't. He pulled back, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. I was going to tell you tomorrow after I got official confirmation, but now seems like the right time. Remember that angel investor I mentioned? The one who was interested in our business model? I nodded. A month ago, a man named Marcus Zhang had visited our cafe multiple times, always asking thoughtful questions about our operations, our sourcing, our vision. David had been convinced he was considering an investment, but after initial conversations, we hadn't heard back. He called today. His investment group wants in, not just a small stake. They're talking about a significant infusion that would allow us to not only stabilize but expand. My heart leaped, then immediately plummeted. This isn't out of pity, is it? Did you tell him about our situation? David shook his head firmly. I've been completely transparent about our current challenges, but that's not why they're interested. They believe in what we're building, Mel. They see the potential even if my parents can't. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. How significant is significant? David named a figure that made my eyes widen. It was enough to pay off our business loans, renovate the unused second floor of our building, and still have operating capital to weather any further economic storms. There's one condition, he added. They want us to consider a second location. Apparently, they've been looking at commercial properties in several areas, including Oak Ridge. I froze. Oak Ridge? As in the ritzy suburb where your parents live, where the median home costs more than we'll make in a decade. The very same, David confirmed, a mischievous glint in his eye. Apparently, there's a prime commercial space available that would be perfect for an upscale cafe. Your parents would have a fit, I said. unable to suppress a small smile at the thought. Probably, but they're not the ones signing the checks. He kissed my forehead. So what do you say? Ready to become Café mobiles? I laughed for what felt like the first time in months, one step at a time. Let's see the investment agreement first. The agreement, as it turned out, was even better than we'd hoped. Marcus Jones' investment group, East West Ventures, wasn't just offering capital. They were offering expertise, connections, and a vision for growth that aligned perfectly with ours. They loved our fusion concept and believed it could thrive in upscale areas like Oak Ridge. By January, we'd signed the paperwork. By February, renovation on our original location was underway, transforming the neglected second floor into an elegant event space for private parties. By March, we were scouting locations in Oak Ridge. Through it all, communication with the Harringtons remained strained. David spoke with his younger sister, Grace, occasionally, but his parents maintained a chilly distance. We hadn't been invited to Sunday dinners, family birthdays, or the annual Easter gathering, not that we'd had time to attend with the cafe's expansion keeping us busy 7 days a week. Have you told them about the investment? I asked David one evening as we reviewed plans for the Oak Ridge location. We'd found a beautiful space in a historic building just 2 blocks from the Oak Ridge Country Club where the Harringtons were founding members. Not directly, he admitted. Grace knows some of it. I'm sure she's passed along the basics. But not the scale of it, or the Oak Ridge plans. He shook his head. I figured that would be a nice surprise. Speaking of which, he pulled out his phone and showed me an email. East West Ventures just acquired another property I think you'll find interesting. I scanned the email, my eyes catching on a familiar name. The Oak Ridge Country Club. They bought the country club. Not exactly. The country club was already owned by a hospitality group that's been struggling financially. East West acquired the hospitality group. David leaned back, watching my face. Marcus says they're planning significant changes to make it more modern and inclusive. Apparently, the current management is quite traditional. Traditional, I repeated, knowing exactly what that meant. The Oak Ridge Country Club was notoriously exclusive, with membership by invitation only and a reputation for catering to a very specific demographic: wealthy, white, and preferably descended from other members. They're considering bringing in new management, David continued casually. Someone with fresh ideas about hospitality and community engagement. I narrowed my eyes at him. David Harrington, what are you plotting? Me? Nothing at all. His innocent expression wouldn't have fooled anyone, least of all his wife. But if someone with expertise in creating welcoming, inclusive spaces happened to be interested in consulting on the project, I might have suggested they reach out to that person. You didn't. I did, he grinned. Marcus is very interested in your vision for what a truly modern club could look like. No pressure, of course. It would just be advisory at first. I sat back, mind racing. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had no experience running a country club, but I did understand hospitality, community building, and the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued. And the poetic justice of it, the Chinese-American woman deemed not good enough for Christmas dinner potentially reshaping the very institution that embodied the Harrington social standing, was not lost on me. I'll think about it, I promised. The opportunity to consult on the country club redesign remained on the back burner as spring turned to summer and our business transformation accelerated. Our original cafe was thriving with its new event space. Construction began on the Oak Ridge location, with a targeted opening in September. Then, in early July, I received an unexpected call from none other than Evelyn Harrington herself. Melissa, dear, she began, her voice dripping with a sweetness I'd never heard directed at me before. It's been far too long since we've caught up. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, checking to make sure I hadn't misread the caller ID. Yes, it has been, I agreed cautiously. I've been hearing such interesting things about your little cafe. Grace mentioned you've been doing some renovations. We have, I confirmed, not elaborating. Let her ask specific questions if she wanted details. How lovely. It's good to see you and David making the best of things. She paused, and I could practically hear her gathering herself for the real purpose of her call. The reason I'm reaching out is that Richard and I are celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary next month. We're planning a rather elaborate party. Congratulations, I said automatically. Thank you, dear. Originally, we had everything arranged at the country club, but there seemed to be some staff problems there recently. Very unprofessional, lots of resignations. The whole place is in disarray. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Those staff problems were actually a carefully planned reorganization by the new ownership, including the replacement of several managers known for discriminatory practices. I'm sorry to hear that, I managed. Yes, well, these things happen. The point is, Grace mentioned that you have a new event space above your cafe. I was thinking perhaps we could see it as a potential backup option. I nearly dropped the phone. After almost a year of being treated like an embarrassment to the family, Evelyn Harrington was asking to host her prestigious anniversary celebration at our little cafe. I'm sure we could arrange a tour, I said, mind spinning. Wonderful. How about tomorrow afternoon? Richard and I could come by around 3. The tour was surreal. Evelyn and Richard Harrington walked through our cafe and event space with the air of benevolent royalty surveying a quaint village. They nodded approvingly at the tasteful decor, the quality fixtures, the elegant table settings we'd arranged as an example. This is actually quite nice, Evelyn admitted, sounding surprised. Much more sophisticated than I expected. Thank you, I replied, choosing not to comment on her evident shock that we could create something beautiful. We've worked hard on the design. And you can accommodate 100 people up here? Richard asked, glancing around critically. Comfortably, I confirmed. We've hosted several corporate events of that size already. Have you? Business must be picking up then, Evelyn commented. It is. I smiled politely, offering no further details about our financial situation. After inspecting every corner and asking numerous questions about our menu, staff, and availability, they huddled together for a brief consultation. Well, Richard announced, it seems this might work after all. Our anniversary is August 15th. We'd need the space from noon for setup, with the event running from 7 to 11. I'll check our calendar, I said, pulling out my booking ledger. I already knew we were free that evening. We'd been turning down bookings for that date specifically because it was the planned soft opening for our Oak Ridge location. But they didn't need to know that. I made a show of reviewing the calendar. It appears we do have that date available. Would you like me to pencil you in while you consider other options? No need, Evelyn decided. We'll take it. The country club situation isn't likely to resolve itself in time. Send us your standard contract and we'll get everything finalized. As they left, I heard Evelyn remark to Richard, well, at least now we'll have to invite them for Christmas this year. The smug condescension in her voice solidified a decision I'd been mulling over since their arrival. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus John. Marcus, it's Melissa Harrington. About that country club advisory role, I'm in, and I have some thoughts about the timing of certain announcements. The weeks leading up to the Harringtons' anniversary celebration were a whirlwind. Beyond our usual cafe operations and preparing for a 100-person event, we were putting the finishing touches on our Oak Ridge location, and I was deeply involved in the country club restructuring. Are you sure about the timing? David asked one night as we reviewed the final plans. It seems a bit theatrical. Since when are you concerned about theatrics? I teased. But yes, I'm sure he considered this, then nodded. Okay, I trust your judgment, and to be honest, I'm looking forward to seeing my father's face. The day of the anniversary party arrived and everything was perfect. The event space was transformed with elegant floral arrangements in cream and gold, Evelyn's chosen colors. The custom menu featured elevated versions of their favorite dishes. The staff was impeccably trained and dressed in crisp black and white. Evelyn and Richard arrived early to oversee the final setup, accompanied by a professional photographer to document everything. I greeted them warmly, noting with satisfaction the way Evelyn's eyes widened at the transformation of the space. This is quite impressive, she admitted. Executive director of the country club, she hissed. What exactly does that mean, Melissa? I met her gaze steadily. It means I'll be overseeing all operations, membership policies, and programming. The new ownership group has some innovative ideas for making the club more reflective of today's community. And who is this ownership group? East West Ventures, I replied. The same investors who believed in our cafe when others thought it was just a hobby. They see value where others don't. The implication hung in the air between us. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. So all this time, while we thought you were struggling with your little cafe, you were actually building something significant. I finished for her. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so breathtakingly lacking in self-awareness that I nearly laughed. When would that have happened, Evelyn? Perhaps during the family Christmas we weren't welcome to attend, or maybe during one of the Sunday dinners we haven't been invited to in nearly a year. She had the grace to look momentarily abashed. We thought. We were concerned that we were failing, that David had made a terrible mistake leaving finance to open a cafe with his immigrant daughter-wife. I kept my voice low and controlled. You thought we'd embarrass you in front of your friends. The irony is, we've been more successful than we ever imagined, while you've been hanging on to an outdated version of status and success. Before she could respond, I added, "Don't worry though, your membership at the club is secure. In fact, I've already approved the renewal myself." I walked away then, leaving her speechless, perhaps for the first time in her life. Later that evening, after the cake had been cut and most of the formal celebrations concluded, I found David chatting with his sister Grace in a quiet corner. "There you are," Grace exclaimed when she saw me. "The woman of the hour. David's been filling me in on all your secret success. I can't believe you managed to keep it quiet for so long." "It wasn't intentional secrecy," I explained. "We were just focused on building something solid before making announcements." "Well, Mom's in a complete state," Grace said with undisguised glee. "One minute she's outraged that you didn't tell them about your success. The next she's bragging to her friends about her son and daughter-in-law's hospitality empire. I haven't seen her this discombobulated since the club changed their dress code to allow women to wear pants in the dining room." David laughed. "Has Dad said anything?" "Just that he'd like to see the business plan for the Oak Ridge Café. I think that's his way of extending an olive branch." As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Richard approached us. He'd had several scotches and looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "Quite an evening," he said, surveying the room. "You two certainly know how to make an announcement." "We learn from the best," David replied. "Mom has always had a flair for the dramatic reveal." Richard chuckled. "That she has." He turned to me. "Melissa, I owe you an apology. We underestimated you. Both of you, really." It wasn't the most gracious apology, tinged as it was with the implication that they'd only been wrong about our capabilities, not their treatment of us. But it was something. "Thank you, Richard," I said simply. "This country club position. It's significant," he continued. "Many of my business associates are members. They'll be watching closely." "I'm aware," I assured him. "I understand the responsibility." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you do." He clapped David on the shoulder. "Your mother wants a word before we leave. Something about Christmas plans." After they left, the staff began the cleanup process while David and I retreated to the small office behind the kitchen. He loosened his tie and pulled me into an embrace. "So," he murmured against my hair, "how does it feel to be the talk of Oak Ridge?" I laughed. Honestly, exhausting, but also vindicating. My parents, I mean. I considered the question. I think they'll adapt. They're survivors, socially speaking. Once they process the shock, they'll find a way to incorporate our success into their narrative. "Already happening," David confirmed. "Did you hear my mother telling the Andersons that she always knew the cafe would be special? That it was just a matter of finding the right clientele?" We both laughed at that. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "part of me expected to feel more. I don't know, triumphant, watching their reaction, but mostly I just feel free," David supplied. "Like we don't need their approval anymore." "Exactly," I smiled up at him. "Besides, the real satisfaction will come when I start implementing changes at the club. Wait until your mother sees the new inclusive membership policy and the cultural fusion events I'm planning for the fall." "Now who's being theatrical?" he teased. "I learned from the best," I replied, echoing his earlier words. "And speaking of theatrical, did I mention that the first major event at the newly renovated club will be a Lunar New Year celebration? I was thinking we might invite your parents to host a table." David threw his head back and laughed. "Now that I would pay to see." As we locked up the cafe that night, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from being disinvited from family Christmas to overseeing the very institution that symbolized the Harrington social standing. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about proving our worth, not to them, but to ourselves. About creating success on our own terms. And if, along the way, we managed to expand some narrow minds and heal some family wounds, all the better. After all, true success isn't just measured in profit margins or social standing, but in the communities we build and the barriers we break down. The Harringtons had called our cafe a hobby, our dream naive. But sometimes it's the dreams others dismiss that end up changing everything, including perhaps those who did the dismissing.